All right, I can see we have a few more people joining us. In just a few seconds, we'll get started here right at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Well, it is 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, so we do want to go ahead and get started with this very exciting event, Designing Resilient Cities, Global Leaders in Water, Landscape, and Urban Transformation. My name is Anthony Iraqi. I am the Professional Development Manager with Playcore. I am a white male with a white polo shirt on, with a goatee, glasses, and dark hair. So we are excited, as you can see on your screen, to have a very diverse group with us today from across the globe, and they're going to be joining us for this exciting conversation. And as we mentioned a few moments ago, if you haven't had the chance, we do have our on-demand still up and available. You can go back and learn more about these individuals through our platform, which we are going to discuss here in a few minutes. But we want to thank, first and foremost, the Cultural Landscape Foundation for partnering with us on this very exciting initiative. So we've been working with them for a few months, like I said, to put together an on-demand series. And now we have this live event, and it's really been just a great opportunity. And if you're not familiar with the Cultural Landscape Foundation, they're a nonprofit established in 1998, and they connect people to places. They educate and engage the public to make our shared landscape heritage more visible, identify its value, and empower its stewards. It achieves this mission through the ongoing development of its four core programs. What's Out There, which is North America's largest and most exhaustive database of cultural landscapes. Pioneers of American Landscape Design, an in-depth multimedia library inclusive of video oral histories chronicling the lives of significant landscape architects and educators. Landslide, which is an ongoing collection of important landscapes and landscape features that are threatened, and the Cornelia Hahn Oberlander International Landscape Architecture Prize, which is a biennial prize in landscape architecture that includes a $100,000 award and 2 years of public engagement activities. So a very exciting group for us to partner with here at Playcore. So fortunate to have them with us tonight. So before we jump into a bit of a Playcore overview, we do want to talk a bit about the Zoom interface for those of you that might not be familiar with it. You can see on your screen there where the presentation will be, how to adjust your screen size. If you need to step away, the transcript icon at the bottom, Q&A to submit, the chat area, and audio controls. Now, we do ask that you put all questions into the Q&A, which will be monitored during this event. Please do not utilize the chat, as that is our opportunity to give any information that's pertinent to all of you. But if you do have a question you would like directed towards the speakers this evening, please utilize the Q&A feature. Listening, so the audio for today's webinar will be broadcast through your computer speakers. Ensure that they are on, and you can check the audio setting in the lower left corner. If you do not have audio capability, there was a phone number that should have been delivered as well too. Zoom sends out numbers for call-in, or if you are listening on your phone and you need that information, you can find the information that was sent to you when you registered for this event. We do have real-time captioning for this. So if you locate the CC option on the bottom, you can turn captioning on. You can move the box anywhere on your screen. You can adjust it, and it has the opportunity to view a full transcript option. Now, if you are looking for captions that will be auto-generated in a different language, I do believe you have to select auto transcribe. We have a live captioner working with us tonight. I don't believe those will be generated in a different language, so make sure that your settings are correct when you adjust those. If you have any questions, again, we ask that you submit any questions into the Q&A box along the bottom. If you need technical assistance, we ask that you please email core@playcore.com or send a question in the chat area where you can select it going to the panelists and the hosts as well. And we'll be able to assist you in that capacity. Playcore's Center for Outreach, Research, and Education is committed to researching and advocating for the positive impact of play and recreation in communities' health and wellness. In collaboration with leaders and scholars, we gather and share knowledge to positively advance diverse community needs. There are 4 key service areas and turn research into practice. We are committed to sharing that validated research and building informed advocacy that helps empower communities to create great play, recreation, and open spaces. We are passionate about curating, translating, sharing evidence-based research and growing from a growing network of scholars through resources, world-class professional development services, and data-driven support to help local advocates build healthier, happier communities. And we start this with our Research Institute, which is comprised of leading experts from universities, research centers who are committed to investigating, discovering, and translating information that informs our services. Through these trusted partnerships, we publish evidence-based best practices across play and recreation discipline. Our work is rooted in facts, not opinion, and our scholar network helps us ensure that we are a trusted and reputable source of evidence-based information, expanding the impact of academic research on play and recreation settings. You can learn more at playcore.com/research. Our resource library is a collection of evidence-based publications, including best practice design guides, planning tools, advocacy tools, case studies, and standard-based curriculum. These are tools to assist you in designing, planning, and advocating for healthier communities. Our team supports the validated research of our research institute to publish and disseminate relevant knowledge through this library, and is backed by research from that institute, which is time-tested and put into practice by organizations around the world. Our professional development hub combines research and resources of world-class learning opportunities for professionals can share learning and earn complementary continuing education units, CEUs, through a variety of formats and diverse topics. Be sure to check out additional webinar live series that we have coming up, which we'll highlight at the end, our on-demand library, and we do have CEUs available through IASET, AIA for architects, and the Landscape Architecture Continuing Education System, LACES, for landscape architects who are joining us. And if you are interested in getting those, we do get your CEUs. We do suggest you go to education.playcore.com where you signed up for this event, visit your dashboard, complete the survey and quiz, and obtain your CEU certificate, which will be open until May 18th at 11:59 p.m. And we will revisit this slide towards the end. So today, our learning objectives: identify key moments that led each practitioner to pursue landscape architecture and their commitment to water-focused design. Examine how each practitioner's work has evolved in response to regional water management challenges and cultural considerations. Analyze the integration of design and water management strategies across different environmental contexts, and evaluate case studies that demonstrate the effectiveness of nature-based solutions in water management. And before we get started, we do have some polls, like I said, so we are going to launch our first poll for you. And you should see on your screen right now, and we will give everybody about a minute to answer, where are you joining us from? So your options are North America, South America, Asia, Europe, Africa, or Australia. All right, looks like we're slowing down. Majority of everybody has participated, so we will end the poll and share the results. And it looks like the majority of our audience today is from North America. One individual from South America, two from Asia, and then two from Australia. So thank you all for joining us. All right, we have our second poll for you. So now, what best describes you? Landscape architect, designer, urban planner, historian, student, government, or other? A few more coming in. All right, looks like we're slowing down, so we'll end the poll. Go ahead and share those results. And it looks like the majority of you are landscape architect and designer. So we have one historian, one student, one individual who works in government, and one individual who works in other. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing that information with us. All right, so I would like to introduce Charles Birnbaum, who's going to talk a little bit about this, what we're here today with, our partnership, and he's then going to hand it off to our moderator and kick it off. So Charles, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Super. Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to Soak It Up. This is a global summit that the Cultural Landscape Foundation, as Anthony mentioned, a Washington, D.C. nonprofit, who is an education and advocacy organization. We were established in 1998. I serve as the founder and president. This event is part of the Cultural Landscape Foundation's programming associated with the Cornelia Hun Obelander International Prize in Landscape Architecture, also as Anthony mentioned. The prize was created by the foundation in 2019 and is bestowed on a recipient who is, quote, exceptionally talented, creative, courageous, and visionary, and has a significant body of built work that exemplifies the art of landscape architecture. The namesake, Cornelia Hun Obelander, who the New York Times called the Grand Dame of landscape architecture, was an indefatigable trailblazer who set the bar high for the profession. The most recent winner of the Oberlander Prize, the Beijing-based landscape architect Kongjian Yu, is part of tonight's event, and it is in his work promoting the sponge cities concept that addresses urban flooding that inspired this Soak It Up Summit. An important actor in the undertaking of the Oberlander Prize curator, the historian and scholar John Beardsley, was our inaugural curator, and his intellectual acumen was essential to guiding the prize process and programming. We're very thankful for his formative role over the past several years. John, a big shout out to you tonight. Thank you so much. With this event, we formally introduce our second Oberlander Prize curator, landscape architect Elizabeth Mossop, who has an extensive body of knowledge and experience as both a practitioner and an academic, along with an always enlivening, razor-sharp wit. Elizabeth was also part of the jury in 2023 that selected the current laureate, Kongjian Yu. As I mentioned, TCLF is an education and advocacy organization, so I'm going to put on my advocacy hat here for a moment. It's no understatement to say that we're experiencing very challenging times. Indeed, the design arts are being targeted, and landscape architects and the industry serving them are under attack, including the loss of funding from the National Endowment for the Arts and other agencies hollowing out climate science and research, gutting environmental regulations and reviews, and tax credit incentives for solar, wind, and other technologies that are being decimated, and tariffs that are threatening sales and marketing share. This is not a time for complacency. This is a time to act. And that brings me to our panel today. They are all, if you will, activist practitioners. Because of Kongjian Yu's dedication, persistence, and communication savvy, the Sponge Cities concept was adopted as national policy in China in 2013. People, let's stop here for a moment. A landscape architect fundamentally altered a nation's approach to dealing with an existential crisis. I'm very inspired by that. Mia, Koch, Jasper, and Herbert are equally forthright, and they are at the forefront of the most exciting and provocative developments in the landscape architecture profession, as you all no doubt learned from the pre-recorded interviews each did in preparation for today's summit. Before I turn this over, I would also like to thank our panelists and moderator who span the globe and are coming to us from many time zones. And for Herbert, it's very, very early in the morning. Thank you, Herbert. All of our participants are inspiring and make us smarter. I also want to thank Aileen Berenger, Managing Director here at the Cultural Landscape Foundation, who has been air traffic control for this endeavor for months. This event would not have happened without her deft organizational skills and good humor. And then finally, the Cultural Landscape Foundation is extremely fortunate and grateful to have Playcore as the sponsor for this event. They have been true partners who have been unwavering in their support. Because of their generosity for this summit, it is available free of charge to all attendees. This is a big commitment on their part and comes on top of all of the informational and educational initiatives they already create and administer. In addition, they have managed the registration process and will handle LACES credits for those who want them. Thank you to everyone at Playcore. And with that, I would like to turn this over to our Oberlander curator, friend and colleague, Elizabeth Mossop.
Thank you so much, Charles. And good morning to everybody from Australia. And thank you all so much for joining us wherever you are. With that, I'm going to ask the panelists to turn their cameras on so that people can see you as you are introduced. Obviously, you are all familiar with these 5 distinguished landscape architects who are known for their work with water. Kotchakorn Voraakhom from Thailand, the founding principle of Land Process. She's also the CEO of the Porous City Network, a social enterprise that looks to increase urban resilience across Southeast Asia. Kongjian Yu from China, the most recent laureate of the Oberlander Prize. He's professor and dean in the College of Architecture at Peking University and founder and principal designer of Turenscape. Jasper Hoogtenberg from the Netherlands was a senior landscape architect at H&N&S in the Netherlands for over 15 years and is now adjunct professor of landscape architecture at the University of British Columbia. Herbert Dreiseitl from Germany, heroically joining us in the middle of the night, founder and CEO of Dreiseitl Consulting, now part of Henning Larsen. He began his practice working at the intersection of art and landscape architecture, always focused on water, and his practice has now expanded to projects all over the world, especially in Singapore and North America. Mia Lehrer from the United States is the founder and president of Studio MLA, based in LA, and strongly identified with the environmental and cultural issues of California. Mia and the practice have always been engaged in public advocacy through design. In the videos, you will all have seen fascinating discussion of how these designers have come to their passion and commitment to the questions of water and landscape and what those really mean for us today. You will also have seen how dramatically different their cultural and political environments are, as well as their different expressions of the sponge city ideas through landscape design in different parts of the world. And there's a very live conversation in the Oberlander Prize discussions about global landscape architecture and how we look at the practice of people who work in entirely different kinds of environments. And we are going to be no doubt coming, across some of those questions in the conversation today. If we think about the environment of the Netherlands, for example, we have a cultural environment that is so sophisticated in terms of its understanding of water. We have very powerful central planning. If we think about Thailand, we have entirely different approach to water governance. We have very different kind of economic environment. China, again, we have a political system that facilitates some aspects of landscape architecture very dramatically and yet restricts others. So, and we have this incredibly volatile situation currently in the United States, which is really impacting both education and practice in our disciplines. So I think that's a really interesting starting point for what we are talking about. You've had the opportunity through the videos to learn in more detail from these people in their own voices about their practices, also more about specific projects. And while the works span across a huge spectrum, the themes of climate adaptation, social equity, connection to nature in cities, invention and applications of emerging technologies, and the questions of leadership and impact have also permeated all of these discussions. And so these are some of the questions that we're going to be exploring in more detail today. Just want to remind you that if you have questions for the panel, please put those into the Q&A. We will be monitoring those, and I will also be, taking the opportunity to ask these questions to the panelists. But let us start by thinking about, these practices, represent a really wide and interesting snapshot of what is happening across the world now. But where is this work going? I'm very curious to find out what you are all thinking about where the most interesting innovation is in this work. Can you give us examples of things that illustrate where things are going? And, what do you think is the most important next thing? So, Kongjian, I'm going to go to you first around innovation.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you. It's so great to meet people from all over the world, particularly I mean these speakers from different climate zones. So I have to mention climate here. We almost forget the whole world is being carbon driven about how we should do climate. 95% of investment is on trying to cut carbon emission. Now that's why I think Trump, to some degree, he is confused. He's right, because we are talking about carbon, but we dig into science, and current findings that actually water is the most important amplifier. If carbon is a climate, initiator of global warming, but the water contribute the majority of global warming or whatever the disasters we have. So we're all talking about climate adaptation, water, certainly adaptation, but I want to talk differently. Differently today is managing water is actually a mitigation solution. It's holistic, but a mitigation solution. So current science are focused on vapor and cloud. Remember, and this has been what make cloud? The lower cloud. It is the water, the vegetation, the wetland, the soil sponge that create cloud. And the low cloud will cool off the temperature. High cloud will heat up the planet. So that's why water and land-based, the solution is on the land, not the carbon actually. It is the water that will double, triple, or quadruple the climate change issue. The solution is water, but the indicator is carbon. Now that's why I think the next step is for landscape architecture, not just adapt to the climate change, but also a solution, a key solution to climate mitigation, including sea level rising. That's why I want to go to the next step, right? So landscape architecture is land-based, water-driven profession. That's the only profession that work with the land, and that we can work with water to transform the land and then affect the climate change.
Koch, what are your thoughts?
You're muted.
Yes. Thank you. Hi, everyone. สวัสดีค่ะ. I'm so honored to be here with you, with all the panelists and with all the speakers around the world. I really agree with Kongjian Yu that the world should focus on climate change. And I'm actually now in Texas, and I think just trying to advocate for the issue of the climate, but some of the place in the government sector that I couldn't say even the word climate change. I think this is a little bit funny, but of course we know what's going to happen according to the consequences and to what Kongjian Yu had mentioned. But I really like the innovation that, of course, we know that nature-based is the key, it's an answer. We have to repair this relationship with us and nature. But as you mentioned, Elizabeth, that we are practiced in such a different political environment that I think slow down all these solutions. And even myself and some small colleagues that have a seat to go to COP, we only discuss about, let's imagine about the carbon of the whole world is just like pouring in this bathtub. And the whole water in the bathtub is about to pouring out when the temperature reach out to 1.5 or 2 degrees. And the whole COP is actually fighting on top of who's going to pour the last cup of the water before the whole water is pouring out from the bathtub. So I think the vision should be much more than just thinking about this last cup of pouring. Is it going to be global north? Is it going to be global south? So I think the solution is so clear. 5 of the panelists are practicing, and many of us in this discussion is actually trying to fight for that solution. But what slows us down is political situation and bureaucrat system in each country. Even in Thailand, in China can do very fast. In Netherlands, you are ahead of us. But we kind of figure out just within one nation or one city, this is a global issue. So I think we need innovation on how we're going to communicate and move this fast enough, because for us and for many countries who are on the front line, either to urban heat, either to flooding, either to many other things, I think we cannot just wait. Yes, we need more innovation in policy making. I don't want to say policy making, but it's just much more than just we are trying to figure out right now. Yes.
Great. Herbert, your thoughts?
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. And Elizabeth, just to let you know, for the introduction, I'm completely independent, so I'm not handing out or whatever, just to let you know. And I'm really so happy to see a lot of my colleagues and my friends, Mia and Kongjian Yu, I haven't seen for a long time. So fantastic to see. We are actually on the same page. And I'm looking forward to meet new colleagues here. Hopefully soon. Well, I think what was just addressed is absolutely right. It's the whole question about how we fall out of balance. I wouldn't call it even climate change, because climate change is always happening. It's really, we are in a climate crisis at the moment, which is much more dramatic than just change. Change is always happening if we look at nature. But it's really a crisis which is extreme. And what I think, to your question, was the most innovation. And I think in our team here, in everyone, we are talking very much about what's the human impact on land and on surface. And I think it's on both sides that when we look at water, we see that water always tends to have a very interesting balance, where water is it's balancing temperature, it's balancing humidity, and we don't give water the opportunity to balance in our cities, because we make everything completely, we ignore water in a way, and we ignore the potential water has in this realm. And I'm not talking about any carbon footprint or so. I'm just talking about what is the role of water to balance extremes, temperatures, humidity, base of life, to give really all opportunities. And I think our biggest invention, what we can do is in our profession, and what we have done, is that we look on the urban scale, on agriculture, of course, as well, but very much on the urban grid, because it's getting bigger and bigger. We seal the surface of this planet, and we have less and less blue and green infrastructure. We have less and less nature-based solutions, and our profession has to bring it back. And the big challenge is, and I think that's the innovation, we have pocket parks, we have here and there a little bit. We had some good examples, and we have to do so much more to spread it out and really make the whole city as a resilient system, which has much more a better water balance. And to work with that, blue-green infrastructure because we need vegetation as well, because this interaction between water and greenery is a very interesting one. And by that, bringing that back, we have a chance for the future. I have been also on many COPE conferences, and I always see this very abstract discussion, and it doesn't really understand the basic concept about what water is doing on this planet. So this balancing element of water, we have to reinvent, if we call it sponge cities or whatever, and we have as landscape architects to be much more progressive also in policy making, in politics, in changing things in our society. We still have a long way to go. That's what I say for this moment.
Jasper?
Yes, thank you very much for being part of this conversation. And I fully agree with Herbert that we still have a long way to go. But I do see, I don't know if it's an innovation, but an emerging change in our water management tradition. And it's really nice to hear you putting Dutch landscape architecture and Dutch water management on a pedal, like we should be guiding the world. And I think we have a large tradition in the Netherlands for managing water, but we also have a large tradition of engineering our way out of problems, but thereby also engineering our way into new and unknown problems. And I think we've come to a turning point where we acknowledge this and where we also rely much more on the resilience of natural water systems. And I think the true innovation does not lie in going back to just natural processes and natural patterns, but combining our knowledge, our increased knowledge of these natural processes with our increased knowledge of technology. So, for instance, as a concrete example, we've had this Room for the River program in the Netherlands, where we actually gave more space for the river to breathe, for the river to discharge its water. And that was not just going back to nature, going back to the patterns that we used to have, because in that case, we wouldn't be able to have cities in our delta landscapes. But it was really a combination of applying techniques where necessary, but relying on the resilience of natural processes where possible. And so I think this is not something that is already accepted on a broad scale, but I see this as an emerging new phase in our tradition of water management.
Mia.
Hi, good afternoon or morning, everybody. I appreciate sort of this conversation. I think one of the sort of important aspects of sort of my professional life, which I have found very productive and necessary, is to get involved in the political sort of environment, as in advocating in a way that's important. I think it's been appreciated by elected officials to learn more, to understand important factors. I would say there's a generation of the elected officials in the 50-something that are really kind of well educated and really responsible. But so being involved in the nonprofit world with organizations that are involved, whether it's with the urban forests or forests in general, or habitat, or the ocean. So many, I mean, I ended up on, about 5 different boards that I've been on. Turns out I realized the other day I'd been on them for 50 years. And it's made a difference because I started in my 20s. I was a young mother and I think I got to do something. I just think, in terms of what we do, and of course now I'm on a commissioner for the Department of Water and Power, which is the largest water and power department in the country. They have then, you know, their area of sort of service is enormous. It's not just, you know, the borders of California, it moves in north, south, and towards the east. And so it's just such a learning curve, but so interesting and important. And so bringing up what we are and what we do and how we can basically bring to life some of the issues that they're trying to address, you know, everything from how to integrate solar power, for example, how to make people realize that being responsible about how much power you use is important. So becoming more responsible as an individual, you know, basically homeowner or business owner. By the same token, water, you know, how, you know, sort of understanding sort of where water comes from and how we can really be conserve and appropriately sort of use, you know, water, whether it's for private properties or for agriculture or other, you know, sort of other land uses. So I basically what I'm advocating is for landscape architecture and for us to realize that yes, that how we speak about it is important, and a lot of the taglines that we use, which are really great. And of course, when you talk of innovation, just because I did just spend 2 days with Carl Steinitz and listened into the ESRI conference in the last week, you know, you realize, you know, how what we can bring to the table geopolitically, just in general, to really sort of have an impact and to influence how resources are, you know, used is important. And the tools are there. And I think all of us, you know, have students or have, you know, people in our practices. And so staying engaged in that way and sort of being active participants at every level, I think, you know, I think we would all agree in this group that we don't have jobs. You know, we're sort of part of society in a productive way. And it's not a job. It's, you know, we believe in what we do and we like, you know, we want to contribute meaningfully.
So Mia is just speaking very eloquently about this role of advocacy.
Yes.
And Koch also spoke to the issue of speed, which I think, I mean, is very present in my thinking at the moment, because I am, you know, I'm feeling this visceral sense of urgency around this work. And Koch was also talking about the sort of, you know, and I mean, I'm putting words in her mouth here, but the sort of the handbrake of politicians and the handbrake of bureaucracy. And I'm not having the experience that Mia is of well-educated decision makers. I would have to say I'm finding the sort of the opposite here. And I guess one of my constant frustrations is that we have so many tools available to us. We know many things about adaptation, about more resilient cities, about healthier places. And yet, how can we sort of break out of this sort of the straitjacket? How, with this greater sense of urgency, are there things that we can collectively or individually do that are different to really be more impactful? And I understand this is an entirely sort of culturally specific question, but it must be in all of your minds. So who wants to start with that? Is that you, Koch, since we're building on your
Sure, and I
comment?
think I can let all the panelists talking about the tools, but what I finding the urgency of fixing all this impossible, but also glooming the younger generation a possibility. And I think this is what we all try to do, but I don't think we can do more, of course. And I think the tools, of course, we try to advocate for nature-based solutions and trying to be in politics realm, like myself working with the Dutch government. And I really think what I like about the new approach of Dutch is not trying to rule the world through water, through their expertise, but trying to understand and working together. And I think there are so many tools as it's not landscape architect, but we need to develop that tools to make landscape architectures work. And one tools that so many tools, and we can talk this for like an hour, but if I have to pick one tools, I think our tools that much in need in urgency is the younger generation. And we know that it's not going to fix within our generation or even with my generation, but I just feel that the education system, what we're teaching them, is that are we well equipped them with the right tools to figure out the future that we are confronting. And I think we can do more. And I think the bridge between practitioner and academia have to be like merged with these problems. So we have a bigger army. I think we need more people on this. Yes.
Jasper?
Yeah, if I can bring up two tools, I would say the first one would be the power of imagination. I think, especially listening to Kongjian's video, where he envisions the whole world to be a sponge planet, and explaining how we've changed the face of the world in the past decades, and we can change it again. But that's a change that has a lot of urgency. So it's going to have to be a rapid change, and people find it really hard for their environment that they grew up in to be changed by outsiders like landscape architects. And I think I really understand this fear of change, because people know what they have to give up. They know that they have to give up the landscape that they're familiar with, and they're often quite uncertain with what new landscape they get in place. And I think there we have the power of imagination to imagine those new landscape. And it's not just about making nice renderings, but really explaining how this landscape functions and how this landscape works, not just for water or for nature, but for all functions, including all the needs of humans. And I would say the other tool that is maybe even more important is that we as landscape architects perhaps are social workers in a way. So I think we as landscape architects cannot take on this whole task ourselves. We have to always work together with other disciplines like civil engineers, like ecologists, water managers, politicians. And I think as landscape architects, we are, as generalists, we can have this overview, and we can guide all these disciplines and all these various interests into the same direction to move forward together. So I think our power as social workers should not be underestimated.
Herbert?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I would just like to put my finger in the problems, what we have and what tools we might need to develop, because looking back on different parts of the world, and I find everywhere the same problem. It is that water management and working with rainwater or infiltration or evaporation is basically taken over by engineers. That's they do the deal. They do everything. They do pipes, and they actually have the mentality, and that is a society mentality. It's not only the engineering mentality. Is water is a problem, and you have to get rid of water as quick as possible, out of sight, out of mind, in the underground, in big pipes, or in drain canals, and get it out of the city. And still, even if we are talking about climate crisis and that we have to create sponge cities, very often it is taken over by big companies, and I can see this all around the world on big projects. The engineers say that's our domain. We can actually solve it. And what they do, and I'll give you just one example. I just had an interesting case actually in my hometown even. They put it all again on pipes, yeah, and then they drain the water in pipes with big rain or separated pipes on sewage and rainwater, and then they are so deep already that then they make a kind of bio treatment, yeah, nature-based solutions they call it, and it's a deep basin where you need fences on both sides. So people say, what is this? It's terrible. It's a waste of time, a waste of space, and so on. So we can see that the interpretation of what we mean to have a different approach to water, towards water in our cities and our urban regions, which I think is the most urgent points, is still very much in the domain of the old approach of engineers. And actually it goes also on and on because they get better payment. They can actually have construction costs, which are high, so they get a better fee. So the whole system actually is has to be turned upside down. And cities who are clever and smart enough, and that's why I love to work in cities like Copenhagen and Singapore, where we actually start to think more strategically on a high level to say it's all about surface structures. It's really the realm of rooftops, of facades, of swales, of streets. And here the next tool comes up. We occupy so much space just for traffic, for asphalt. And if we would have started to change and say, we need more space for nature-based solutions or for green solutions. So I think what we have to stand up, and it's actually our profession and it's also our education. We have to be much more on the forefront on decisions. We have to go much more innovative in politics and in policy to make a change. We cannot actually wait for others to call for us. We have to call out very loud and say, hey guys, you have absolutely to turn this and switch around. And I think that's very important. That also is a learning process for the profession of landscape architecture. And of course, it is in universities needed that we have a completely different ways of education. That's why I'm, for example, teaching at NOS cities, because we are turning it around. We say we bring all professions in, because it's also about what also Jasper just mentioned. It's about society. It's about how to create a better livable world and city, how to fight dementia, how to get less depressions. We know that greenery and good water and green solutions in cities can change completely the psychological well-being of people. That goes hand in hand. And we have additions in biodiversity and so on. I mean, a lot of arguments, and we have to be louder. We have to be more strategically. I think that's the tool we need to develop in the next 10 years.
Kongjian?
I totally agree with Herbert, and it touches the fundamental fundamental question. I think Elizabeth's going to ask next, maybe. It's about the role of our profession. I think the tools, the fundamental tool today, when you compare to COVID, COVID and climate crisis. So the science, the scientific community leading the decision maker, leading the policy. So today's science about climate change is biased. It's not a good science, I have to say. So research is, as I mentioned, focused on so-called carbon, try to cut carbon, slow down. So single-minded, okay, single-minded. I say never look down to the ground. Never look down to the ground. I say think water is a constant factor, and the carbon CO2 is a driver of the climate change. That's right, but the system didn't work that way. The system didn't. You have carbon, you heat up, but actually the ground, the land, the water is the solution. So that's, I think. So when you look at the CCC, whatever is COP 29, COP 28, COP 2030, keep going. Even in the Paris Protocol, they make direct wrong direction. Okay, so that's why I put all the investment. So that lead the policy, that lead the finance. As I said, all the World Bank investment is on keep building concrete dams and dikes and aqueduct. That's called adaptation. Okay, that's called adaptation. And we are still talking about solar panels, windmills, and hydropowers. They think it's a green technology, by the way. Totally wrong, right? Totally wrong, because it destroys the whole ecosystem services, which mean, go back to the negative impact to the climate. So that's one tool. How can we get into science? I think that's number one. We have to use different. How can we integrate this science? That's number one. The second, certainly, policy. We needed to be able to. By the way, about science, we didn't publish enough. I think it's a profession didn't publish enough. So outside of the world, scientific communities, they don't know there's somebody's doing this kind of work, nature-based solution. We've been here for 100 years. And suddenly nature-based solution come out. The second, certainly we needed, how can we influence the decision makers, the policy, international policy today, because climate change is a global issue, not only regional. So I appreciate Kotchakorn, you go to the UN, right? UN, we have influenced this COP 30, COP 29, this policy, how they give more attention on this land-based, water-driven, global sponge planet. Now that's a policy global issue. And certainly that will influence the local, even regional and national policy. So this is the second tool I think we needed certainly to make louder voice, make use of.
Kongjian, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I forget. So number one tool is science, okay? The whole world is misled by the scientists. They are focused on carbon. Little attention on the ground about climate change. Because science, like COVID-19 or COVID, the misleading, the decision makers' policy, the same. When the whole world is facing the crisis, the science becomes so important. But the scientist always misleading. That's number one. I think is a tool. How can we get into science? I think that's important. The second, certainly, is financial, of course. But as the world's financial is misled by the science, adaptation, as Herbert mentioned, 95% of the investment from World Bank is go to the gray concrete solution, dams, aqueduct, walls. They're going to build another wall in Indonesia, for example. So they call it adaptation, but that's totally wrong. Okay, that's totally wrong, but it's still considered to be a climate adaptation solution, right? And the investment, 95% investment is on so-called carbon green solution, like windmill. Of course, windmill to some degree is green, but not necessarily ecologically green, okay? And solar panels, hydropowers, we all consider these to be green solution, but actually they are so destructive. In some cases they are green, but at least in China, they are so destructive. And so that's science. We have to understand what is really green, what is really healthy, climate positive, and holistic. We call it nature-based solution. But as a profession didn't go out in terms of science. We didn't see much go to the science, the number one tool. The second tool is in policy. The third tool is finance. As I said, all the finance being misled by these scientists. And I have also to mention culture. When climate change, the whole world can change. I mean, everything needs to change. The good news is that we already have cultures that can adapt climate change, which Herbert just mentioned. Climate always changes, particularly in the global south. I have to say, today we are so sad, only 1% from the global south. Most of the audience from the global north. Now that another, but actually in the Southeast Asia, monsoon climate is climate changing, monsoon climate. We have such a rich culture about adaptation, addressing climate change. So sadly, the global south always copy, always adopt the global north technology, particularly this great infrastructure, which Herbert mentioned, and also, of course, Herbert mentions the Dutch engineers come to the south, global south. Now that's very problematic because all the cities, India and China, Thailand, which build up on this great infrastructure fail. They all fail. And we didn't even think about that. Why they fail? Why they fail? Because simply this infrastructure cannot adapt to this global north climate. But certainly the bad news is that global north also facing the climate change now. Now that's why the knowledge from global south can be applied in the global north. So because that's cultural heritage, we've been adapting to the climate change. And finally, I think go back to the technology, the tools, the technology, the capacity building of our profession. And the landscape being considered today, till today, we still think as superficial as, by outsiders at least. We are being considered to be in a narrow, very narrow field between architect, urban planner, engineers. So that's a tragedy. So how can we break through the profession, the discipline since the Renaissance, since the Enlightenment period of time? So Industrial Revolution or industrial, we need, how can we define the profession so that we really can to make use of climate change as a change for the profession to leading the role that we as an engineer fixing the globe. I think that's tools. How can we use? Yeah.
You can see from the expression on everybody's faces how well they understand the sort of the dominance of other professions in our field. And I have certainly been thinking a lot about this recently. And, I think one of the things that collectively that we struggle with is the complexity of the climate crisis and the complexity of what we are trying to communicate and the complexity of the strategies that we need to address these problems. Whereas if you think the answer to everything is a culvert or a bridge or a drain, that is so easy to communicate. And I think, and certainly in my experience, most politicians are also looking for simple answers. So that I think there is this enormous, around this question of impact and how to flip things so that people are really putting natural systems and people at the center of things. I mean, that is a profound change. We are all, somebody mentioned, almost no one likes change. No one wants to see their landscapes changed. And, the sort of, I think these questions about how you bring people along on this journey is just as true for politicians as it is for communities. And a lot of you have talked about the importance and the power of youth. And a lot of you have talked, sort of education has come up in this conversation. And for me, I think one of the biggest changes has to be around communication, but I am also interested in, your ideas if there were one or two things that you were going to change about the way we educate landscape architects to be more impactful, what would those changes be? Mia, do you want to start us off with that?
Well, I just want to say that I see certainly the younger generation of students, and I can only speak for the Western states, and I haven't been working all over the world at this point, that the school systems are extremely are really engaging with the issues that are being discussed. I mean, starting from kindergarten, as to where you throw your sandwich leftovers, or what you do in and around your daily life. It is something that young families of children born in the 80s and 70s, 80s, and 90s are really sort of working, are active in the school districts, and the school districts are responsive and interested in this education and basically bringing people up. Now, because we do have a lot of technology companies in California, maybe there's some things that come through, also some of the major universities, but whether it's the Amgens or the Esris, of course, but also the universities like Stanford, there is a lot of energy around more solutions that are also engaging. I mean, we have great engineers we work with, and great engineering firms, and they're very collaborative, and so more so than the architects, I would say, necessarily, but there is a lot of energy in terms of some of the major infrastructure that's happening is actually tremendous collaborations. So maybe we need to make sure some of you are doing some work out here and But I mean, some of the, like I said, some of the private sort of the private companies are, very engaged and very, concerned and want to develop better campuses, be more engaged public transportation, for example, or any of the corridors now that we are working on, the conversation about both vehicular, then, rail and bicycle activity, incredibly important. And asphalt paving is starting to be discussed of the need to be basically permeable paving and collecting rainwater all along the edges in order to basically infiltrate and or reuse or in other ways. So there's just a really positive energy around infrastructure, I think, that wasn't there obviously 50, 60 years ago or more when we channelized rivers and streams. I think there's a lot of more thought going to how these waterways can become the hearts of communities and can be used for more than, the sort of practical or, more than drinking water and irrigation, but also for other, the purposes of addressing climate change and also dealing with, basically ecological factors and biological factors. So I just, I'm not feeling I'm more optimistic, I guess.
Herbert, you have talked about, in sort of educational terms, about the importance of students having much more experience of making things and working with their hands and understanding construction and, rather than everything being theoretical. Is that something that you think is going to be important?
Yeah, I think I mean on education, I have several points where I think in my observation it's very important to do education different on working on water topics. One thing is for students to really have a vision and imagination and to train this, how to get really visions and imagination. And I think the best teacher is water itself. So I do often water experiments, and I make people basically sensitive, students from all kind of different disciplines, also engineers, decision makers, policy makers. We in our university we combined even that we bring people who go into administration and politics and to train them about how to think about water. And it needs a kind of fluid thinking. It needs a kind of new ways of imagine water. And of course, we change the world. And it's not getting back to nature in a way, romantic. It's really bringing it forward. But this needs vision and imagination. And it needs it on a large scale. For example, for an entire city. In my experience, if that education comes in, you can make a big impact. Cities like Vienna, Copenhagen, Hamburg, cities like Singapore with the ABC water guidelines, the cloudburst projects, they were all bigger visions about strategic plans for the entire city. Where do we see the city in, let's say, 25 years from now? And that is a very big driver because for everyone, for politicians, but also for simple people, for a taxi driver, he needs to know what's the vision, what the society wants to go to. I think another point in education is breaking silos. We are still trained very much in traditional ways about here are the traffic planners, here are the planners for energy, here are the decision makers for money, here is real estate development, and here are the health sectors, and so on. Everything in silos. And actually, water shows us everything is connected. So we have to break the silos. That's another education tool we have to learn. And by that, it goes together to see the added values which are coming along. I mean, we have all mentioned this. Biodiversity is increasing, which is a very big topic as well. I mean, we are all talking about climate, but loss of species on this planet, on biodiversity, is so much connected to water and blue-green infrastructure. If we don't have them, we lose all these species of animals which are so important, and plants for us to survive as humans also. I mean, this biodiversity topic is extremely important, so that needs to be brought in. I think involvement and participation, what Mia just also mentioned, is how to include the society. Everyone on the road has to be part of the process. I think participation and involvement processes need to be trained much more. And we are often too much either afraid to go into that, because if it's done wrong, it can go terrible wrong. It can be a disaster. But if you do it right, and if you actually engage in the right way, and not just intellectual, but also emotional to get people on, you have big supporters by a population of a city or of a town. And finally, I would like to also to say that it's of course about engineering technologies. It's about hydrology. It's about how to measure things, how to what kind of process is in the change process of digestion processes of vegetation and so on. What can we do for cleansing water? In which way? There's a lot of technology involved, and not to forget something in education which I find also extremely important is the power of beauty. The power of beauty and what makes sense, what is really done, beautiful design. And I think we are all designers here on this panel who have done beautiful design, because beauty makes, not in an old-fashioned sense, in a modern sense, it brings up a kind of inner connection to the environment. And it actually hurts if it is not working well, or if we see pollution and it's ugly, it actually attacks us, and we say we have to do something. But if you have something done, something which really is good designed, you have less vandalism, you need less maintenance, and the next generation is ready to invest into that. So beauty is not just decoration, it's about commitment and involvement for next generations, and to have really a motivation, because it's not just money. Money is basically an impression about what we care for and what we think is important. And I think these points and many more need to be brought into education in our profession much stronger.
Who else would like to say something about education? Koch. And then Mia.
I think I agree with Herbert about breaking silos, and is in the silo with the education systems. Because for me, like living in Bangkok, like a very dense city, when you talk about landscape, they're like big green, big waterfront parks. We don't have that kind of privilege to do that things. So we need to steal the space from architecture. We need to do so many things with the terminology that landscape architecture is something innovative. So I really agree with breaking silos. And I think that's the head part is already figured out, and we can continue doing that. But what I think is very important for the younger generation is how we teach hope. I think it's so important to not only teaching them how to do landscape architects, but also teaching them how to use the heart and then the hope, and then really working with the issues with all these tools. And I think because at the moment, the AI is about to stealing of many jobs, and we can confront that. Like AI has been part of the education now. Even the younger designer don't know how to figure out the scale or how to use the head under the hand. And now they generate solutions and do things. So how can education go beyond that? And I think it's very challenging for us all with the professional as well. And I think all the teaching is great, but the hardest part is the hard part. The hand part, we get them on site, going to figure out with community. I think many of us doing that really well right now. But I think the hard part and the hope, which is very fear-driven society that we are living right now. So how can we combine all together and create like not only a good designer, but the good designer that able to not be fear of dancing with politics and many other things. Yes.
Courage.
Yes.
Mia, you wanted to say something.
Yes, I wanted to share, and I'm glad education was brought up. We have in the last 3 years been working on the second largest landfill in the country. And as part of that process, which, you know, incorporates a river and incorporates, you know, a lot of a lot of different sort of communities in small cities, and a community college. The idea sort of, you know, sort of surfaced about starting a program with high school students, starting from their, you know, second out of fourth year in high school, to really understand, to work with us. And they were in the economic development department from the county. One of the agencies said, we want to pay these young people to work with you. And it's been an amazing experience, because they've actually learned about what we do. They learn about their communities. They actually are able to sort of talk to their parents and to their families. We have developed a process in a sort of something we do is just we print out a very large plan in our studio, which is, you know, 20 meters by 20 meters of the geography of that particular area. So you can walk around and sense the place. And then these young people, like we had them do for a few weeks, they designed sort of a parklet with park equipment. Then they started this, you know, understanding trees. We developed you know, basically a little nursery, and they learned how to plant trees, what the different trees were for what areas and why. I mean, just in general, the kind of hands-on experience that they wouldn't get in a conventional, you know, high school experience. And and they get paid to participate, but they get paid to produce. A group of them we did one other little exercise for 2 weeks was actually to design furniture for parks and for their parks. And believe me, there were some beautiful, fun designs that, you know, we're thinking of fabricating. And beyond that, we have some test plots of native plants that are, you know, being promoted in the area for that region. And they're about, you know, but an acre in size. And the students go there 3 times a week to mind their plants. And it's been a very, you know, sort of psychologically and, you know, for the family, it's been just a very enriching experience and very satisfying for us too. They show up every time with, you know, flowers. When we show up, they give us flowers that they've, you know, that they've cut, or they've given us fruits and vegetables. And it's all just really, you know, we're on year 3 going on year 4 with that group that's going to then go to college. So I think it's really important.
And, you know, quite a lot of people have alluded to these ideas about involvement and participation. And I think that's pretty interesting in this space. Now, I'm conscious of the fact that we are coming up to our time. We have a couple of questions that are sort of people interested in the comments that people have made in relation to the Global South. and asking, what are, if we do not copy what we learned from the global north, should we be looking to more traditional practices of land management, or what should we be doing in that space? So I'm interested if anyone has any comments about that, but also any final comments that people want to make before we wrap up. Jasper, do you want to start us off there?
Yeah. Thank you for this interesting question. It reminds me a lot of discussions that we have and work that we do with students here at UBC. Because, of course, in the context of the Pacific Northwest, we are very well aware that we are settlers on somebody else's land. And there's a lot of respect I see with students about indigenous traditions and indigenous methods of land management. And again, I'm not saying that we should forget all that we've learned and we should put aside our modern technology, but to learn from indigenous or more traditional forms of land management that are much more related, much more in touch with the soil and with the water system. I think it's a very good start, and maybe we can just very lightly layer our technique and our modern knowledge on top of that and see if we could come to new hybrid systems that combine these more low-tech solutions with probably spickled with some gray infrastructure and high tech where needed to meet today's challenges.
Herbert?
Yeah, I don't see such a big difference, actually, by the way, between North and South, or if we call it more industrial developed countries and others, because in places in the North, if I go to Scandinavia or Italy, for example, they had the same technologies on very, very nature-based solutions in the historic side, in the history, and they have just whipped it out by industrialization and by bringing more and more roads, technology, housing, and they forgot about their integrated water management systems. And today they are really struggling, and they have to find it again. And I think it's every part of the world has rich history about good water solutions, and in industrialization, we actually have only seen one aspect and made this very strong. For example, traffic, or get rid of water as quick as possible because we had sewage problems and so on. We could not solve it. And today we have much better solutions. And I think every part of the world, the basic points what we discussed about bringing more nature-based solutions on surface and working more with concepts which are, I would say, more logic for water and for greenery and how to combine that. It can be adapted to any part of the world. It can even be in the most remote places in Finland on the north, on the very north side. They have the same problems. They have extreme problems, actually. And they are finding ways, and I have been working in these zones, and I know that we have everywhere the same concept. We just have to adapt it to the climate situation of this zone. But the answers look very, very similar, surprisingly.
Koch?
I'm not sure, but I feel that there's some difference between the global north and global south. But in the sense that we are living with water and being resilient, it must be a cultural specific. And I agree that many technology, many global north shouldn't colonize us with this water technology. but it's already been done, right? With all the language of engineering and many other things. So I think being resilient shouldn't have just one rule or one particular things that the UN stamp and everyone use it. I think that would be a very dangerous. And I think I have been working with Pamela Conrad on work with nature, and we try to collect all the example from the global north and the global south, just to empowering that waters, working with nature, we all have our own language. And I think I agree with Jasper that technology is the next surface, but we need to understand our foundations. Bangkok is so flooded because we lose track of the water people, the amphibious culture, who we were. So I think as a landscape architect, how can we reclaim that with modern technology and also using other disciplines, other technology from other culture, but in a way that is equal, picks and choose, not copy and paste. I think this is a very critical because all of this solution will last more than our lifetime, 50 years, 70 years, 80 years. And now we still continue doing that. So I think there's so much to be done. And I think that's why so much hope in younger generations. And how can we make them a new armies of landscape architecture that not only just speaking between us, but talking to politicians, working with many other things that I think the knowledge of the profession can be abstract and transferred to many other related professions. We need to educate others more. Yes.
And Kongjian, do you want to just give us a very few last words?
Yeah, very few. I want to say that climate change is a crisis, but all crisis is opportunity. And the landscape is an ecological infrastructure, but also a social infrastructure and a cultural infrastructure. So by doing landscape, you can integrate social, culturally, ecologically. And so climate change, but instead of I'm speaking more, I want to ask Camille actually, at your background, you have the Los Angeles River. And I want to ask, because for 20 years, people always mention to me and talking what's happening there. And how can you use your landscape, this Los Angeles River, as a tool to transform the society actually? I'm curious.
So it's not a great story. It's mired in sort of funding and political sort of setbacks. We have managed to actually be able to sort of recognize it as a river. Imagine that. And sort of the Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for it, is not taking down all the vegetation as they used to. So they used to take the basically all the sycamores and all and wherever there was areas that basically the water had pushed up all the concrete, and there were nice boulders being revealed. Those are all sort of thriving, and there are people minding those areas. There's nonprofit organizations, a couple of the departments from the city are sort of acknowledging that more has to happen. But it's been among the things we're talking, there is a lot of bicycling and pedestrian movement up and down 20-30 miles. The tributaries there's been a lot of work. We've all, 2 or 3 companies have worked on several tributaries, which makes a bit difference because there's, 52 miles of river and then as many, if not more, tributaries. And so the tributaries are getting some attention. And there is a recognition on the part of communities that you can walk and you can jog and you can actually use the river as an alternative mode of access, you know, by bicycle or, you know, by walking. So it's, you know, it's kind of like trying to get rid of a freeway in any other big city. Gotta to actually recognize the river as a river. Hopefully it will happen before I leave this world. What can I say?
Oh, I think
So,
Mia,
that would be a good quote for some people out there.
she's telling us about patience and about persistence and the sort of the scale of these projects require that.
Yeah.
Now we're just about out of time. I do want to thank you all so much for your wonderful engagement today, and I need to hand back to Anthony.
All right. Well, that was fantastic. Wonderful conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We just have a little bit of housekeeping to wrap up this evening. So again, everyone that was with us will be watching the recording after the fact. To get your CEUs, visit education.playcore.com. Go to this event and visit your dashboard. Make sure you complete the survey, complete the quiz. You'll have to pass with that 80%. So there's 10 questions, 8 out of 10, and you have until May 18th at 11:59 p.m. to complete that. Also, if you navigate over to the resources section within our learning platform, there are some links available for you there. We have a few different links that highlight and talk about the Cultural Landscape Foundation and some different items that were discussed this evening. And then we also have some resources for you from PlayCore. So we have our plant database, natural harmony, pathways for play, growing green schoolyards, and then our nature grounds resource as well. So we thought that these were pertinent to the conversation this evening, so those are available for you to download in the handout section. We also ask that you please mark your calendars. This is the 35th anniversary of signing of the ADA Act, and we are doing a series with Bill Botten. We have a disability awareness panel coming up here on May 28th in a couple weeks. We'll rejoin Bill on August 27th for advancing play accessibility and applying accessibility standards to modern playgrounds. And then at the end of the year, we will join Bill to talk about therapeutic recreation. But our panel coming up here on the 28th is really going to be a great one about supporting the needs of individuals with disabilities in your programs and services and individuals within your community. We also want to let you know of some other trainings we have coming up. June 11th, we're protecting and planning surfacing investments. So it's called Strong Foundations. We have a funding series in October. And then we also will be partnering with the Association of Aquatic Professionals to discuss aquatics in November. If you'd like to learn more about some of the events with the Cultural Landscape Foundation, they'll be doing Landside in Action and Visible Histories along the Mississippi River on June 25th. And then in person in October, there will be in Chicago. They'll be in Louisiana on October 9th, and then ASLA Fall Cultural Landscape Foundation reception coming up on October 10th. So we will also be there present with PlayCore as well. So if you are attending that event, make sure you find both the Cultural Landscape Foundation and you find the PlayCore booth as well. We would love to hear from you. Additional resources can be found with questions, you can email core@playcore.com. Education.playcore.com again for webinars, learning, development, and professional training opportunities. Additional resources at playcore.com/resources. If you're looking for funding of any projects, we have a funding tool as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate everybody that was with us, and we will catch up with all of you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.